Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event. Introducing Carissa Breen Industries. Let's get ready to launch!
Today, I'm talking with Jasun Tate, a serious heavyweight veteran of the cybersecurity world. We cover all sorts of ground, from his crossover from the black hat world to the US military to consultant. We talk about all the things he's seen that have led him to his current stance on how best executives can confront the cyber threats. Jasun, thank you so much for joining me on my show today. I'm really excited to learn more about your journey and things you've been getting up to over the past 20 years. How are you doing today?
I'm super fantastic, Carissa. How are you doing?
No, I'm doing really, really well. I'm really excited to this. So let's jump straight in. Jasun, keen to hear about your security journey as it appears quite interesting.
Okay, so my security journey into the, I'd say the cyber warfare game, I started about 20 years ago. I worked for the Navy. I was a United States Naval sailor, if you will. And then in the latter part of my journey in the United States Navy, I started to get into cyber warfare, very unique, I would say, field at the time for the United States Navy to actually develop and start to cultivate the information technology, information warfare, and intelligence, I'd say discipline, and migrate them all into one. In Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, I got out the United States Navy and started working for a government contractor under a classified program for a program called JTF GTMO. The Joint Task Force Gitmo, which basically stands for Joint Task Force Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And that's when I started really delving into cyber warfare and computer network defense. That's the actual technical term that they leverage. That was when I really started getting into cyber intelligence. This was back 2002. And since then, I was recruited to work for a few intelligence agencies and worked also for the Army Research Laboratories. And then for about 15 years, I did cyber warfare, cyber intelligence, threat analysis, red team operations, and actually did a lot of threat hunting. So, without speaking in a lot of acronyms and military lingo, I tracked and traced and hunted cyber terrorists for all intents and purposes.
I think that you've definitely got an extensive journey, and that's definitely the area that I want to go down. Now, what I'd like to ask you is, I understand you have a very strong viewpoint on some of the ongoing aspects of the US government voting process, particularly the recent elections. Can you please explain your views in further detail?
I sure can. I have no problem in doing so. So just to give a bit of context, 4 years ago, I started a company, Bits and Digits, and there's a reason why I'm actually bringing this up. I created this company because for a long time, I was on the opposite side of how people understood cybersecurity. When I got into the cyber intelligence and cyber warfare game, excuse me, when I got into the cyber warfare game, it was behind closed doors. A lot of people that did what we did were only doing it in those communities. So it goes without saying, we knew things that other people didn't. It was very classified, highly sensitive, and we knew things about the cyber picture or the cyber landscape in the world that other people didn't. I got out and started my own company because I felt like there was a very large gap in between what is available to protect people from a technical and also from an argumentative and intelligence perspective. So I started this company to try to basically bridge that gap. So to your question, 3 years ago, I was literally talking to my business partner about some of the data breaches that were taking place. Now, mind you, before I started Bits and Digits, I was the chief information, I was the business information security officer for the public sector of Experian and also the marketing sector of Experian, the data broker or the credit reporting agency. There was a big breach that had taken place there. I left and started my own company. Long story short, here's where I'm going. I was talking to my business partner, and we were discussing all of the breaches that were taking place. Experian, T-Mobile, HV Gary, all these major big city, big time blockbuster breaches, Sony. And I was saying, if I wanted to, I was telling him, and I was joking, I was being very jovial. I said, if I wanted to do something devastating to America, you know what I would do, man? I would go out and I would actually infiltrate all of these companies, throw all the data out there. So the forensics and any kind of analytical tracebacks or investigations, it would be impossible for anybody to identify where these breaches came from. Ironically, I'd say about 3 months later, that's when we started to have the influx of breaches all across the world. I mean, you're talking T-Mobile, you're talking Anthem, you're talking Experian, some of the largest data brokers, some of the largest brokers of sensitive information and technology companies were getting breached left and right. And it resonated, I'd say, a month later when I was doing some darknet research. That was one of the services I used to provide. And I was noticing that there were a unprecedented amount of databases that were breached on the internet, being sold on the darknet for pennies on the dollar. There was a time where, there was a 1.3 billion passwords and usernames that were just posted out on the internet. And it just hit me. It didn't make sense. That I remember back in the days when I was doing darknet research, it would cost you about $500 to buy a database of about 1 million people. And those that 1 million people wouldn't. It wasn't surgical. And this database that we're talking about, there were NSA, there were Diebold. And to be more specific to the question that you're asking, just about every last company that is registered on the electronic voting registry on the EAC.gov, each one of those companies, Diebold and EAS, they were in this data breach. So after looking into it deeper, I said, you know what, this is just happenstance. It couldn't be anything correlating to, anything coming up. And this was before the election. This is, I'd say, the latter part of 2015. Slowly, we started seeing the DNC. You remember the DNC hack? You remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Democratic National Committee hacks from the past couple of years.
Right. So these little breaches, or these breaches that were taking place, the NSA lost 50,000, credentials, and you've got, again, Diebold, you've got Experian, one of the largest data brokers in the world. And Experian, let me just highly illuminate what the importance of the Experian breach was as it relates to this topic. Mm-hmm. If I want to rig an election versus hacking it, what do? I target the minds. I target how a society or a nation thinks. I want to control how they think and subdue it. I want to suppress it. So I'm going to do a suppression campaign. I'm going to go out and make sure that my targeted ads that I leverage through Facebook and Twitter and all of these other synthetic social media companies, I'm going to make sure that I own the narrative. I'm going to make sure that I know everything about everybody that's ever going to vote, and I'm going to know what their viewpoint is before they even think about it. So I'm going to inundate the ad networks and the marketing networks with a whole bunch of just extra or misinformation, as we call it. And I'm going to condition the networks or condition the election from that angle. And that's if you want to take that angle of how to rig an election. And of course, I'm not going deep on that one unless you want to. Now, we take that information that we just discussed, and you couple that with the OPM breach. You remember that? The Office of the Department in the government that maintains the database and the most intimate details about everybody that owns a clearance in the United States. Not only that has a clearance, but that has any kind of position of trust. That database was breached right before the elections. And while it was swept under the rug, I would say not by the media, but it was. And I don't mean to speak with any kind of conspiratorial overtone. It's just the truth. It's the facts. And that's by design. Everybody has a PR, public relation, or communication protocol, and that's what was leveraged in this situation. And coming from that background where I worked in top secret environments for 17 plus years, I understand how that works. However, what's very interesting is nobody pays attention, or it was very, very little attention was paid to these tech companies that had their data breached, that there were records exposed, that, I would say anybody with a moderate level of intellect could put those pieces together and say, okay, so, Sun runs, this microchip company, they developed this type of bus board, and this bus board is actually found in the diode or in one of the main electronic voting systems that we, use in our elections. Why aren't those lines crossed? Where's the link analysis, or where's the investigation on that? Now, without going into too much depth or chasing rabbit holes, I wrote an article about this, ironically, but I came to the conclusion that it would be impossible to identify right now where the election rigging would have happened as far as attribution is concerned. However, we all, I would suppose or assume that a lot of us heard about the DEF CON hacking voter village. I was there. And that threw my neck for a turn, because not only was it so easy to circumvent the security parameters or the security controls of these voting systems, the maturity of the regulations that govern them, the STIGs, if you will, or the secure templates or implementation guides of how, or the baseline requirements of how a voting system should be configured, were almost non-existent in comparison to, you think about a motor, or the electronic components of a car. There are regulations and guidelines that govern how these systems are made. And we can't say that it's a lack of maturity, because we've been using electronic voting systems for a long time. But it is kind of interesting that the maturity of our safeguards for the electronic voting systems are so sophomorish. Let me just say that. And on top of that, how does one go about it? I wouldn't say that it's, how, Hollywood portray, some secret Russian spies come into, an industrial supply chain system where the chips are being manufactured and plant some chip. However, I wouldn't say that's too far on talking about that. But in reality, you wouldn't need to do it. In reality, it wouldn't take much effort, much time to go in and understand, okay, well, people are not following the basic rules of data security. You go into any of these companies that run the electronic voting systems, and they don't adhere and yes, I can speak definitively when I say this, they don't adhere to the basic business practices for cybersecurity and data privacy. You've got Sarbanes-Oxley, GLBA, PCI, FISMA for the government federal programs, which, require certain things like data at rest encryption, authenticated logons, authentication level 2, where you have to have something something you have, and something you are to, provide access to a system. You look at these companies that provide the construct of our voting system here in America, and you look and say, well, how would they measure up against a moderate level hacking attack? Well, I don't think we have to ask that question. The proof is in the pudding. You can type into Google 1.4 billion passwords stolen 2015, and you'll see a list of every company that has anything to do with any electronic voting system that we've ever used, and you'll see those names. And that should answer your question, at least lightly.
What are the implications these mechanisms have for the executive in the private sector? Talk more on the data breach side of things, because that's definitely an area of concern. You probably heard the mandatory data breach notification that's come into Australia. So it's definitely been a heavy topic here. Obviously, if they do get breached, they have to declare that to the government as well as the customers. What type of advice could you give to executives out there so they can feel a bit more reassured in their security practices and procedures?
Yes, first and foremost, I would say executives should not be afraid to learn the basics of cybersecurity so they can understand their threat landscape. Executives have been traditionally focused only on business. And in my experience as a consultant, it's always been, the consultant comes in to talk to the executives, and they tell them or illuminate some of the issues that they have. And we're speaking to a ghost in the shell. That executive then defers to the CISO. The CISO defers to the information technology manager in hopes that they implement the right safeguards. But here's what I'm about to answer your question with. The day that the executives that run these companies that are highly concerned, branding, the PR, the negative blowback of a breach for their enterprises, the investment of $1,000 or some small investment to go take a small course on data privacy or information security as a whole would suit them well, so they can digest and understand what are the real vulnerabilities in their networks. For instance, a mature configuration management program, ensuring that everybody inside of an organization that are key players in the IT infrastructure across the entire enterprise has a CM board, a configuration management board that meets regularly to discuss the status of all of their information technology equipment, what the inventory controls are, when pushes are made, when pushes aren't made, what are the statuses of that situation. And the person that is chairing that board in the CMDB, of the configuration management board, that needs to be illuminated at a C-level component. Number 2, data at rest encryption. Data at rest encryption is one of the most, I would say, it's actually one of the only safe harbor controls that you can implement, one of the few safe harbor controls that you can implement to ensure that breach notification doesn't take place for an institution that has data at rest encryption. What is data at rest encryption? Whole disk encryption, or encryption on a hard drive or a data system that is encrypted with AES 256 or 128-bit algorithms, or in America, we call it the FIPS 140-2 compliant encryption algorithm standard. And this needs to be implemented holistically. And this is one of the biggest problems that I've seen in organizations. They go out and procure a technology, and that technology says it's going to encrypt everything. All of your information or systems is protected. But what people fail to do or realize is that this company may be headquartered in Sydney, but it has 25 satellite offices. Who's managing and who's controlling the encryption, data at rest encryption solution across all of these different locations in the organization? Is the solution federated? Has it been distilled and disseminated across all points of the organization, and who's monitoring that? These types of statuses and updates need to be brought up in the CMDB or in the CMB, Configuration Management Board, and illuminated at the risk meetings. These are really critical things. Another thing, keeping updates up to date and federated in your organization. It sounds simple, but this is when I get calls to come in for a ransomware or to fix a disaster, it's almost like a doctor. Look, you can pay for prevention, but remediation is going to cost you twice as much. And as far as data breaches are concerned, one of the easiest things you can do is implement a software update server. And the only way that you can have an effective software update or a Windows update or an update solution for your enterprise is to understand what your enterprise contains. One of the biggest things that I've seen in the industry is you may have a Windows-centric environment and you think that deploying a WSUS server is viable, but it's not. Your inventory control system that has an inventory of every software procured should marry up with the inventory system that is electronic that you have in your enterprise. And that marryment needs to be checked effectively and efficiently at least every week to ensure you're not missing out software products that require updates throughout the enterprise. Because it's not a one size fits all. A lot of people say, okay, or a lot of institutions that I've seen, they go out and they buy an update solution because that's what happens. That's the business or the game of cybersecurity. That's why in the beginning of this conversation, I said it's imperative that these execs take a little course, just a little familiarity course, so they're not hustled or bamboozled or played against their ignorance. So if you get these tech companies to come in and say, look, we have a software update solution and it's going to update all your things. And then they like the price tag, they like the way that they were wined and dined. Come to find out, it's a plug and play solution. It only works for Windows, but you have Windows, you have Linux, you have Sun Solaris, you've got Adobe products, you've got your Salesforce. I mean, you've got a large federation of different software in your environment that you need to manage and maintain and make sure that every last one of those components are updated. That's 2. Number 3, you got to DAPE it. You got to DAPE it. And DAPE it means deny all permit by exception. At your borders, at your gateways, at your VPN, your outposts, every last one of your satellite offices needs to adhere closely to your main information security policy of the institution. And this is where it gets tricky. And I've seen it. It happens all the time. You've got the headquarters office, they're locked down. They've got the update server. You've got, they've got the tech support, HR. I mean, help desk is in sync. But you go out to, the remote location in Vietnam, and they have a VPN uplink that the bandwidth is very constrained. So they don't want to push updates all across that line. And they don't want to have visibility because it clogs up the operational or the utility of the business utility of that line. So they don't really manage it. The local office manager is not IT qualified. They don't have a local IT rep. So now you're looking at Vietnam, where you have all of your financial data or all of your personal records sitting out there on servers that are antiquated, and the laptops and the procurement processes that you have well matured in your HQ is not being pushed over into that office. You have to have visibility there. You have to have a 360 visibility of your entire enterprise in order to manage it and ensure that it's protected correctly. Number 4, your policies. How do you prevent data breaches and ensure that the liability is not directly reflective upon your brand? Because that's what you're protecting at the end of the day. You're an exec, you're representing a brand, an institution where investors, politicians, and clients trust it. So what do you do to ensure that you are maintaining that brand in the best way possible? Number 1, you have policies that dictate how you operate from an information security perspective. And those policies need to bleed into or marry with the employee handbook. And that employee handbook needs to be effectively communicated through HR onboarding about what the rules of engagement are as far as using information technology products. Because as we said, information security and data privacy and intellectual property theft, that's rampant. I can tell you literally in the last 48 hours about cases where I know of corporate espionage cases where, they want to find out bits and digits. Can you guys tell us how this happened? Yeah, of course we can. You didn't have the policies in place to actually effectively monitor these controls. So when we go into policies, these policies are what's going to save a company from the insurance companies that govern that company or that underwrite that company's policy. They're going to protect them from the liability in the event that, the insurance company says, well, look, did you follow the rules of law? Because that's what the data breach notification rule says. The rule of law says that you'll maintain certain data security standards, and were those data security standards effectively communicated to your employees? Do you have periodic training for your employees to understand the risks and liabilities of surfing porn on a work computer? No. I mean, I say that not to be negative or bring any lower vibrations in the conversation. But these are the types of instances that open up the portals in your company that allows these risks to be introduced and exploited. Going to websites or not having content filtering in place, like a blue coat proxy or some kind of HT proxy that actually monitors what employees are doing on a day-to-day basis, not just to be spies or to be surveillance, the surveillance overhanging arm of the company to say, look, we want to watch what you're doing. No. It's okay. It doesn't matter what people think. At the end of the day, you're ensuring the brand of your company. Yes, you're monitoring. Yes, you're ensuring that this person is not going up and creating VNC or RDP pipes into your network, that somebody can go in and steal that data that's unencrypted, because while it may be data at rest encrypted, that session was open. So now they're pulling it live off of the data, off of that workstation that has a share to a network database that, has personal information. This is what you got to think about. There's 360 degrees. You got to know your network. You got to know your environment. You got to trust your information security officers of your organization, and you have to make sure that you know where your loopholes are, and pay attention.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, you're right. One thing I'd like to talk a little bit more about, and you'll get your opinion. Brand of company. Now, what I've noticed, and you spoke about negative blowback, so absolutely. So when companies get breached and all this type of stuff, what I've noticed, and you probably have as well, sometimes companies don't say anything, and they don't have any sort of comm strategy around how do we handle an incident when we do get breached. What are your thoughts around that? Because, I mean, saying nothing to me personally is probably one of the worst things you can do, because it's not really giving assurance, one, to internal employees, but also externally to your customers and clients as well. Where do you believe executives need to start employing more of this process? Because to me, it's going to keep happening. But I have noticed a lot of companies are shying away from saying anything at all. What's your advice around that?
Companies are shying away. That's the initial response that any PR or any legal counsel advisor would tell an exec about a breach or about a vulnerability in their environment, because of the brand impact, the negative impact that it will have. You're going to talk about a vulnerability that we didn't fix, right? We didn't fix.
We're going to declare it. We're going to tell everyone about it.
And then then our stock prices are going to go down. Our insurance is going to go up. Our brand integrity is going to decrease. So it's a nightmare. So, but to answer your question more effectively, it is the law. It is the law. And it's your duty as an organization to have a communication strategy in the event that this happens. But here's the truth of the matter. There's no good way to effectively communicate a breach. In my opinion, on my side of the railroad where I stand, which is in between both sides, I give a shout out and applause any company that stands up and owns their breach. Number two, how they do it, and because I've been privy to a few of them myself, how they do it is extremely important. The timing, when you release that information, what are you doing to remediate it? If you're able to effectively communicate a breach, you need to, in the same breath of "we have been breached," the second thing that needs to come out of your mouth is how you're remediating, how you're safeguarding these people's, the people or the clients or the data that's been exfiltrated, and how are you moving forward. PR, crisis communications is an art in and of itself that I don't proclaim to be an expert in. However, I've definitely played in those realms. And what you communicate needs to be vetted with your legal counsel and your insurance company for a number of reasons. But again, what is one of the main problems with breach notification? Here's something that I'm going to illuminate. Because of the liability that a company may assume by declaring a vulnerability or a breach or a hole in their network, they've become very shy and very reserved and hyper conservative about accepting responsible disclosures. And we all know the responsible disclosure system is one that was created by a whole bunch of, let's just say, angels to say, look, we understand there's a system out here, there's corporate people, there's government people, but we're just cyber Ronin that we want to go out and help you. And then you've got the bug bounty people that want to make money off of disclosing vulnerabilities. But the responsible disclosure system, every company needs to go ahead and open it up and take it seriously. Create a responsible disclosure system where they can leverage a solution like Secure Drop, where it's anonymous and it's encrypted. So the person that's submitting the vulnerability about your company can do it anonymously. And the person that's receiving it is somebody in your organization strategically placed, I would say, between the chief legal counsel and chief operating officer and chief information security officer. And that program needs to be constantly monitored to listen to the people that are submitting data about, listen, we found a portal open over here. If you don't close it, you're going to get breached. And 9 times out of 10, that's exactly what happens. And it's not a malicious actor that's doing it. It's somebody tinker-tailoring and playing around in the backyard. So again, I guess to answer your question with more precision, it is imperative that the institution understands that it has to accept the responsible disclosure system in their organization. Accept it. I'm not saying make it public, but have one that's available. Number 2, have an effective PR and crisis communication protocol in place that is married and vetted with your legal counsel and your compliance office.
Can I just interrupt you? Sorry, can I just interrupt you there? Just on that PR, effective PR. Do you think there may be a disconnect because generally public relations people don't have a security background? So obviously there's still this debate around the comms aspect. How do you think companies can sort of help fill that gap? Because traditional PR people don't come from a security background, so they might not understand, I guess, the terms, the jargon, what needs to happen. And sometimes when you're dealing with, security teams, they're very technical and struggle to communicate. Absolutely.
And I'm going to answer that question 2 ways. If I have the mental faculty to understand in order to achieve the position of vice president of PR of an organization, I've probably studied a lot of more material. I've learned crisis management. I've learned crisis PR, and I've studied. And I learned that I know that my brain works a certain way. I read something, I digest it, and then I learn it, and then I reenact it in my day-to-day life. Taking that same motivation and taking a little course in security. This is one of I go back to that. Remove the ignorance. The ignorant quotient out of all of these different positions in an organization no longer are viable. I don't care. You are a VP, you are the chief communications officer, the chief PR advisor, then you should go out and study. Take a 1-week course on information security. But for those who don't want to take that advice, here's how you effectively come up with a solution. You have your position is like information security officer. There's people that manage teams of information security practitioners who understand that dealing with the social aspect of managing people, the technical aspects of managing a firewall or universal threat management systems and CSIDs, et cetera, et cetera. Those people know how to communicate with the board, the non-technical jargon. That's why they're in the position. That's the only reason they got elected to be a CISO, is because you're sitting at the board meetings, and you're not speaking ones and zeros and TCP flags and et cetera, et cetera. You're able to effectively communicate those issues in a manner that is digestible to the audience that you're speaking with. That person in that organization needs to be hand in hand married with two people in the organization, chief legal counsel or the PR team. When the communication comes out of his or her mouth, it goes into the digestion system of the legal counsel to make sure that they're saying things that are not going to, cause any irrevocable damage to the brand. And then the PR person takes his or her knowledge and communicates that. It's not one person. This is a merriment of a team that needs to come together and meet regularly. They need to meet regularly because they need to, at the risk advisory meetings that every company should have, and if they don't, they need to develop one. This is where the key leaders or technology leaders and security leaders of the organization should communicate with the executives on a weekly basis to discuss the risks, so that they're not only aware of them, but they're tracking the mitigation of them. But more importantly, in the event of a crisis, you're not behind it. In crisis mitigation, you have to be in front of it. You step in front of it, you control the narrative, you establish the optics, and you manage it accordingly. If you're not doing that, then you're behind. You become fodder, as we call it, just chopped up dust, and people, the media will take a stab at you. But those companies that if you've seen it, and historically, those companies that are really, on point, they understand, okay, this is how we're going to communicate. They don't come out so bad. Look at Marriott. Look at how Marriott handled it. Marriott did one thing that I think gives them a little bit more respect than other companies. They realized one thing: this is not our game. We don't do this. We didn't manage this effectively. We still have holes. You know what we're going to do? We're going to go hire a company that handles crises. That's what we're going to do. We're going to go hire Kroll, and they're going to come in and take care of all of this. That may not be very advantageous from a cost perspective, but when you don't know something, getting out in front of the camera and communicating things without a script, without a protocol, you're just going to make yourself look horrible. There are companies that design to do it. There are consultants that are designed to do it. And as everything in life, when you don't know something, own it and then step in front of it and find a solution.
And I think that's the main thing about owning it, because honestly, just in my opinion, like you said, the worst thing you can do is shy away from it and not say anything. What I'd like to circle back on is, obviously you spoke about, the government election, the voting process. While we're still on the topic of mitigating risk, what can be done to minimize any future occurrences?
A lot of things. You made a comment earlier about, that was the government and the voting system is all about the government. I just want to touch on this one point really lightly, and then I want to get to your answer, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The government runs the electronic voting system process, right? It does. It's the overseer. However, it's an abundance of civilian companies that provide the technology of which these the votes take place. The regulation that governs how these companies should be manufacturing their supply chain, the physical security controls of their chips and how it's distributed. All of that, to answer your question, needs to be governed by an effective information security guideline. It's not new. There are multiple systems out there, or there are multiple policies out there that govern different things. Like, for instance, if you're dealing in the United States government and you want to deal with cloud, you want to provide a cloud service to a government entity, whether that be the Army Research Laboratories or a Marine Special Forces foreign operation post out in the middle of Fallujah, and you want to provide that as a civilian company to these soldiers or these Marines or these operators out in the field, you have to go through a FISMA accreditation, and you have to get FedRAMP approved. And these are guidelines. These are FISMA and FedRAMP are two different guidelines that manage and oversee the security of how these technologies are introduced in the field. Why not implement a very stringent, a very direct, and a very monitored control system based off of the risk management framework that the government uses, and actually enforce it on these companies? I don't see why that is the simplest low-hanging fruit answer to this problem. That is a solution.
One last thing I'd really like to ask you is, do you think blockchain-based voting systems like Secure.vote could be instrumental in solving these types of problems?
And the famous quote, it depends on what is means. No, I'm being funny. It depends on a number of things. What is the problem? Is the problem the voting system? Like not the technology, but is it the construct of the voting system? Is there a flaw there? I don't think so. I think the flaws in the oversight and the management and the responsibility, identifying the responsible party of enforcing security measures across the entire technological sphere of voting. That's my personal opinion. However, in order to, in the evolutionary terms of where we're going and where we've been, of course, those systems are a little bit antiquated, obviously. A blockchain type solution for electronic voting system, I think, would, and provided the right conditions and the right oversight and the right checks and balances, leveraging the open ledgers type style of blockchain where everybody can see it and things have to get vetted, confirmations are coming into play when votes are made. In time, when we reach that level of maturity technologically and intellectually, I definitely think that blockchain could be a viable option. Most definitely.
When you say in time, are you talking, how long are you thinking?
I'm thinking, yeah, right. I would say in order for this big ship to steer in the direction where it'd be adapted or adopted by the United States government, I'd say 5 to 10 years until it's vetted all the way across. But we're there from a technological standpoint, and the startups and the amount of intellectual capital we have in Silicon Valley and even out there in Sydney, in Australia. They're all across the world. There's intellectual capital across this world that we can create a voting system that's salient, that's secure, that's transparent, but that has integrity that can't be tested or I would say interrogated. I definitely think we have that technology now, but that's not how this ship. This is not a boat; it's a ship.
No. Yes. And it's about the adoption. It's about the behavioral change of people wanting to adapt, propagate that across, all of the government agencies and making people sort of more evangelists for this type of solution. So definitely optimistic on the 5 to 10 years. So no, I do appreciate that.
Yeah, hyper aggressive in my optimism.
Yes, but I like that. That's awesome. Well, Jason, I think I've absolutely been really impressed with everything that you've spoken about today. I think that it's definitely given a lot of perspective, not only for me personally, but definitely our listeners. If people were to reach out to you, how can they go about that?
They can reach me at Tate, Tate, at bitsdigits.com, or they can reach me at alchemy@exploitation.university, which is my new school that I'm developing for people that want to learn cybersecurity at the C-level or the executive level.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate you spending the time.
And I really appreciate your time as well, Carissa. It's been an honor.
Thank you. We'll speak soon.
Ciao.
Thanks again for joining us. I hope you got some insights from this episode of KB Cast with me, KB. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play to get every new episode as it's released. And as always, show notes are available from kbcast.com for every single episode. We're building a community, so always love to get feedback, ideas, or questions on hello@kbcast.com. Keep on keeping on.